Ellen, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. So, what is the Great World Race?
The Great World Race is a group of a few dozen people with potentially pathologically troubling judgment getting together and running a marathon on all 7 continents in a row, with the whole thing taking just under a week.
And you actually went and competed or participated?
I did, yes. Compete is too strong of a word for what I did, but I was there and I finished all 7.
Wow. Okay. So can you break it down? So where do you start? How does this whole thing begin?
Yeah. Well, so we agreed to all meet in Cape Town, South Africa. And the idea was that we had a briefing 2 days before the first event. But we found out at the briefing that they had been monitoring Antarctic weather patterns, and we had a very narrow window to hit, which meant that instead of being 2 days out from the first race, they said essentially, be in the lobby, 4 or 5 in the morning tomorrow, we're going. They had to move up the entire thing. So it was a study and adaptation from the beginning, but that first one was in Antarctica, and then we ran the very next morning, a few hours later actually, in Cape Town, South Africa, and then jetted over to Perth, Australia. And then we ran on the European side of the Bosporus Strait in Istanbul, and then the next morning on the Asian side of the Bosporus Strait, and then to Cartagena, Colombia, and ended up in Miami for the North America race. It was a whirlwind.
So hold on. The first one was in Antarctica?
Correct. Yes. Yep. I know.
So how did you get there? What's it like? Are you running on snow, or is there's exposed rock or trails?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was snow, and it's the area that we were in is Queen Maud Land, and it's quite a ways interior. So it's not what you might think of from documentaries of the coastline with the penguins and all that. It was quite a ways in. It's called the White Desert. That's what it's known as. That's sort of an anecdotal name for it, but that tracks when you get there, because it is just an endless swath of frozen ocean, essentially. But the specific area we were in was Wolf's Fang, and that is an actual geographic location. And that's named after these jagged rocks. So these sort of brown-gray rocks that it looks like a child's jacks. I'm dating myself here, that jacks would be a toy, but those little metal toys. It looks like those kind of sprinkled across this frozen ocean. So I'm from Minnesota in the United States, which is very, very cold and snowy during the winter months. So for me, it was relatively balmy, not too bad at all temperature-wise, but it was definitely cold for marathon standards.
Before we go into the details and some of the people you met along the way, and of course your book, which we'll discuss, why?
That's an excellent question. I actually was at a American football conference a handful of months after doing this, and a fairly famous NFL quarterback, Andrew Luck, retired NFL quarterback, came up to me, and it had been announced that I did this, and he said, I have one question. I said, sure, I'm ready. Hit me, Andrew. Why? And I said, my joking response is efficient way to visit Antarctica. I'm only half joking about that, because I've been sort of a nerd for polar exploration and read everything there is to read about Ernest Shackleton, who's a famous polar explorer from the early 20th century. And I've always wanted to go, but I thought you had to be like a researcher or somebody, scientist, and I am very much not. I'm a writer. So that was a huge part of the appeal. But I've never been a fast runner, but I love taking on increasingly unhinged challenges. And I also love travel. I try to keep up with my age and the number of countries I've been to, and I'd fallen a little behind. So this caught me back up.
That's awesome. I mean, getting to Antarctica is on my list as well. I've always dreamt about surfing there, just going and finding some little waves, but the logistics, although I do live in New Zealand, so there are ways of getting there. It's just a case of actually making the preparations, but I love it. I love it.
And an incredibly thick wetsuit, I would imagine.
It's got to be incredibly thick, and gloves and boots and the
all
hood.
The things.
The whole deal. But wouldn't it be cool just to jump off that boat and catch a couple of waves?
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So how many people in total? You said a couple of dozen.
Yeah, well, so there was about 50 runners, and then we had a great sort of crew and staff with us as well. So we took one plane down to Antarctica. There's only a certain number of pilots and planes that are allowed to, and there's no runway. You land on the ice and snow. So it was packed snow was what we were running on. But then we were all together on the same plane. We're on the same plane from South Africa through the end. And fun fact, it happens to be the exact plane that the Rolling Stones had used on their previous tour. So there were lots of jokes about, investigating where Keith Richards may have left a stash, or not
I can
literally.
imagine.
Sorry, Keith. We know you're on the straight and narrow these days.
Yeah, for sure. That's fascinating. Okay, so that removes the complications of commercial flight. So at least you're all
Correct.
together on one plane. And
Yes.
what about the jet lag? I mean, surely you're suffering from jet lag and you're having to go and
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I don't think that we were in any location long enough for me to get jet lagged. In most cases, we were on the ground for a grand total of like 8 hours, and it was, wheels up after that. So I think it was just a sort of perpetual state of, I don't know what time zone I'm in. You didn't have a chance to get behind. But I do know that I spent about twice as much time running as I did sleeping that week. Yeah. And even though obviously being on a plane together was enormously helpful and a huge privilege, this is not something that is part of my everyday life. We still had to go through customs and, the traditional routes and luggage, and, didn't make it to the airport on time in one situation. So, you still have all of those travel hiccups that you would expect. It's actually amazing that more didn't go wrong logistically, because this was a logistical nightmare. And I'm so impressed with the people who put this together, because it could not have been me.
yeah, yeah. And were there moments when you questioned whether you could continue? I mean, obviously you did a lot of training and prep, but nothing can prepare you for that,
Right.
what you actually did.
Yeah. And in fact, that was actually sort of one of the big equalizers. I was surrounded by people of incredible athletic caliber, but it is, humbling, because it's very difficult to train for this specific pattern of, run, fly, run, fly, run, fly. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that there wasn't a moment when I thought, I'm done. I literally can't do this anymore. But for me, the toughest one was the Europe race, number 4. It was night, it was windy, it was rainy, and I don't normally mind. I used to live in London. I don't mind running in rainy conditions, but the footing was a little bit strange. And there were these fishermen that were lining the Bosporus Strait that were like casting back across our path as we're running. And I now know that I was suffering from the initial onset of this venomous spider bite. So I was feeling in pretty rough shape in Europe. And it makes more sense in hindsight, knowing what was going on. But even then, it was more like, I just have to find a way to power through this, not, that's it, I'm going to pack up my bags and head home.
Have you always been a runner?
No. I come from a family of endurance athletes. My dad ran marathons, and my brother's an elite cross-country skier and runner as well. But I was always the one sort of complaining and getting dragged along, family hiking trips and that sort of thing. But I did 1 year of, in the States, we call it junior varsity track, which is like the lowest possible level. It's basically the kids that they pat on the head and just say, have a good time. Not competitive at all. And even then, I was so bad that I'm quite confident the coach never bothered to learn my name. And that was it. That was once when I was 14. And that, to this day, is the extent of my coaching experience, like having been coached as a runner. So, but I did end up training for my first marathon. Well, I was, I believe, and got hooked. And so even though I've never really been part of a team or had a coach, I've been running marathons and ultimately ultra marathons since then.
Okay. So you embarked on this journey. How did you discover that this thing even existed?
That's a good question. I honestly think this sounds like such a sort of a pathetic answer, but I'm pretty sure it was Instagram ads, like targeted ads. The David Kelly, the race director, is a smart fellow, and I think he knew something about the algorithm. And I must have been, following, because I've always admired other runners and all that. But I had been seeing about this, and then I was in training with my sister-in-law, who actually ended up doing the Great World Race with me. We were training for 100-miler, so we had a pretty good base of endurance training. But we were some of the last ones to sign up. We only signed up, I think, in August for this November race. Yeah. The other way that I found out about it, it was already in my head from Instagram, but Bex Gentry, who's a Peloton instructor, is somebody with whom I took a lot of running classes. And she kept talking about this big adventure that she was doing in November. And I was like, I feel like that's the one that I keep getting targeted ads about. So strangely, I hadn't even really processed the fact that she would, that if we did this, that would be literally with her. And I actually ended up getting assigned the seat right next to her on the plane. And so this is somewhat of a tangent here, but just it was very odd because I'm so used to hearing her voice while I'm on the treadmill that there would be times when I would be sort of half drifting into sleep and I would hear her say something, not that she was disturbing me at all, but my mind would be like, am I on the treadmill and did I just fall asleep and am I about to fall off a treadmill? And so I would have these jump starts. The whole thing was very surreal. That's a long
Wow.
answer to how I learned about this. Yeah.
I love it. So tell me about some of the people you met along the way, because these are some of the themes that run through your book.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I realized not only an enormous caliber of athletic talent, which I suppose you would expect for this, but my sister-in-law and I were in what we dubbed Olympians Row because it was us and then it was Bex. And on the other side of her was somebody who holds multiple endurance world records. There were 2 Olympians in front of us, and it was just an enormous caliber of talent. And then us. And we're pretty sure we dragged down the average finish time of that section by about 90 minutes per race. But it wasn't just that I felt sort of like a junior varsity person. Not that anyone made me feel like that. It just, I could tell. But also, I was easily the least interesting person on that plane. Everyone had such cool stories about incredible obstacles overcome. There was 2 different lung cancer survivors who each were running with 1 lung. They had lost a lung to lung cancer, and so they did the whole thing with 1 lung, 2 of them. And there was also a Welsh firefighter who she did that entire thing wearing an only slightly modified version of her fire kit.
No.
To raise awareness for women in her profession. And I mean, I could go on and on. There was another gentleman who's known online as the king of chemo to his, I think, 8+ million Instagram followers. He was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer at 31, and he's on a mission to raise the most money ever raised for charity through marathoning. And there was an Emmy-winning rock star who ended up in a Turkish ambulance. And it's just the stories, I could go on. And I thought, I'm a writer. It's my nature to want to capture these stories. So I feel really privileged to be able to talk to so many of them in the lead up to this book that I have.
Yeah, it must have been incredible. Could you talk to people as you're running? Could you have conversations, or was it more in between during the travels and in the airports and so forth?
It was some of both. I was horrified to learn. I actually learned through Bex while she was talking during classes leading up that there was no Wi-Fi on the plane, which I was horrified. I thought, I don't want to be alone with my thoughts for all of that flying time. It's terrifying. But it ended up being great because it was like an adult summer camp. We couldn't be sitting there doom scrolling. And ostensibly it was to ensure that we didn't have, more sleep disruption. But of course you can't always just snap yourself into sleep. So it really did turn into summer camp there. And obviously there's the transition periods as well. But on the races themselves, these were all locally coordinated races. Obviously, our team initiated them and coordinated with local folks, but these local representatives put them on. And so these weren't major marathons we were participating in, meaning we were doing looped courses up to sometimes 4 loops. Sometimes there was one where we had to do 20 loops. So you were constantly seeing people, or out and backs for the most part. You'd be seeing them pass. And it was amazing how quickly we would start to know names and recognize each other and cheer for not just yay you, but, it'd be yay Alvaro or yay Ashley or yay Ellen, and, or understand what particular challenges one of us might be going through. And, the way in which it was a sense of camaraderie and encouragement that evolved really quickly. It's very impressive.
Do you prefer running not on a loop, like when you just go one direction and it's always fresh and new, or do you just get the runner's high no matter what?
I don't get the classic runner's high. People are always
Really?
surprised to hear that. Yeah.
Mm.
I hear people describe it and I'm like, I don't think that's something that happens to me. But I will say I tend to get a bit of a refresh, like this quasi lobotomy after the fact. No, it can definitely disrupt whatever pattern I'm in. So in answer to what type of course I prefer, I seek novelty when in general in my life. And so absolutely in general, I would prefer a point to point where it's always new. However, I ended up being really glad that we had these tight loops because it ended up meaning so much to be able to see other people constantly. And in particular, the lead pack of women, there were 5 of them who didn't know each other in advance. And each one of them had the caliber and ability to smash world records on this event. But they ended up choosing to work together, even though they were strangers. And so you would often see at least 3 of them, running in this sort of like multi-legged organism running together. And so, yeah, being able to see other people was great. And as much as I like the point-to-point running, I actually do the vast majority of my training on a treadmill, which people find horrifying. But I have children and I'm a freelance writer and I don't want to be gone for a whole weekend doing these, especially now that I do ultra marathons. Some of my training runs will be, 30, 40 miles long and that kills a big chunk of time. So I tend to do my runs actually Mondays. So would be today. I will squeeze in as many miles as I can in between meetings. And then after the kids go to bed, hop on the treadmill and distract myself. That's where the novelty comes in. I distract myself with all the trashy television I've signed up or saved up for the run that I'm only allowed to watch while I'm running. So that'll be me tonight.
Nice. So a venomous spider bite, where and how did this occur?
It has to be a little bit speculative, and that's my caveat there. When we got our luggage back after being in Australia, where the luggage had been splayed all over this space, sort of a staging ground. When we got our luggage back, I had one of my suitcases tucked right under my legs on a bus to the Turkish course. And I got this sudden stabbing pain in the back of my knee. And at first I thought it was so bad. I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but I thought that I had torn one of those big tendons on the back of my knee. Then later, it was dark in Turkey and it was in pain, but I didn't pay that much attention to it. And by the time the next day, I had, not only were there 2 little puncture wounds, but I had like a red line spreading up and down away from this central point. And I still was trying to tell myself, like, oh, maybe it's just chafing. Maybe it's nothing. But I actually sent pictures to a friend who's an ER nurse back in the Twin Cities. And she's like, I think that might be a spider bite. And actually, this is entirely on me. I didn't even get it checked out. I should have. And the race director and team would have absolutely supported this. I didn't get checked out till I was back in Minnesota.
Really?
And I think that like the whole office I went to probably is guilty of it, like a health privacy violation and I'm making in a funny way because I totally enabled this. They were all like, you got to come see this. Like, oh, this woman has this venomous Australian bite. They're like, we absolutely think that's what happened. We don't really have anti-venom sitting around in our desk drawers in Minnesota. Like, I mean, you're in New Zealand, maybe that's more common there, but we have a lot of mosquitoes. That's about it. So they prescribed me a course of antibiotics and said, keep us posted. So, yeah, it was really painful.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, even spiders that are not that dangerous are pretty horrible in Australia. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, and their best guess was an Australian redback. I don't know if you're familiar with those. And again, I don't know. I'm not a forensic spite investigator, so I don't know. I never saw a spider, which is I think why I was able to practice denial for so long.
I think it's the whiteback, which dissolves the skin.
Charming.
Yeah, it could have been worse, but still to continue running with that. So what are some memorable moments from the run?
There's so many memorable moments. I recall in Cartagena, the heat index, and I'm speaking in Fahrenheit here, but it was 110 degrees heat index, which, what is that? 80. I'm trying to do my conversions here, but 40 some degrees centigrade.
That's insane.
It was so hot that they ended up getting these big barrels full of ice, like industrial sized barrels filled with ice. And they would make us stick our arms into it, like up to our elbows. You'd be sitting there holding your face out of the ice and hold it for like 30 seconds to cool down your core body temperature. And I genuinely think they may have saved some lives by making us do that. That certainly sticks out as a memory. Watching the lead 5 women stick together and decide as strangers. They finished the Cape Town Marathon in a row. They had to like squish to get through the finish line because they made sure they were hand in hand. Even though this technically, not for me, but this technically was a race. I mean, world records were on the line and were ultimately broken, and yet they still chose collaboration. The final finish line in Miami, one of the lung cancer survivors, and my understanding was that these gentlemen did not know each other in advance, but one of them stopped just short of the finish line and he waited and he said, I'm not going to finish until the other one, I'm going to get choked up, till the other one crosses, he says, because no one fights alone.
Oh.
So I know.
Wow.
So he waited and they finished together. Oh, I still get chills thinking about it. And I was so lucky that I was in the finish area and was able to watch that happen. And also the Welsh firefighter had reached out to the Miami Fire Department knowing that we were going to be right in their turf running, right along the ocean, and just to say, hey, just a heads up, like, if you want to shake hands afterwards or something. Oh, they sent out like an entire contingent of firefighters who not only cheered her on, but a bunch of them, with her permission, of course, joined for part of the race, and they had their full kit and they did it. They had recently, I guess, lost one of their colleagues in the line of duty, and so also as a tribute to that person, they did the whole thing in like their full gas masks. And there was one on a slightly more up note of levity. One of them had apparently intended to do as much as possible, up to half of the race, with our firefighter, and was like, yeah, this is really hard. It's like, if it's okay with you, I'm going to walk a bunch of it, and then just like thumbs up.
She's just done 6 of them.
Yeah, I know. She was on her 7th one. And actually, another memorable thing was that this ended up being live streamed. At the last minute, they brought on a live streamer who I made it my mission to make him laugh every time I went by with all my snarky one-liners. But as a result of the live stream, there were up to thousands of people watching around the world at any given moment. And I heard so many cool stories about people who maybe initially came to watch because they were familiar with one of the public figures who was running, but would end up like having these little fandoms of people. And, like the firefighter would get, tell her she's still a firefighter if she takes her jacket off. Like, it's okay. We don't want her to die out there. But yeah, it was quite an event.
Wow. And so all of these different people, they've all got different reasons for being there. Some are actually competing. You said some actually achieved their personal best or even world records?
Yeah, absolutely. There were quite a few personal bests done during that event, but the actual world record, there was a couple different. One of them was the cumulative time, if you add up your time in all 7 marathons. But what I think is a really interesting record that was on the line is the elapsed time from the starting line of the first marathon to crossing the finish line in the 7th. And there was something like 10 or 15 of us that went under the previous record for women. And that is not to say that I ran fast, but that in part, that's a huge tribute to the race organizers, because a big part of that was the logistics of getting from place to place. Yeah, the women in our group, it ended up being, I believe, the top 3 overall finishers were women. And we also have very fast men with us, but there was a combination of some injuries and things that sidelined. But that doesn't take anything away from, I think, even without that, it was an incredibly strong showing from the women. Yeah, I was definitely not out there setting any personal records, but in some ways that was intentional. This makes me sound like I have more control over the outcomes of these races than I did for me, but I made a point of running an hour to an hour and a half at least slower than my personal best, because the people, it blows my mind that people can be out there just redlining every race over and over and over. I've been more sore after sprinting a 10K than I have shuffling an ultramarathon. So yeah.
And what kind of food are you eating between? Are they cooking as part of this journey, or you're getting local cuisine?
Yeah, that's a good question. All of us, had like a suitcase full of our own, personal whatever gels or bars you're used to. But the plane itself they had pretty much constant food available. There was all the meals were served on the plane, and then there was like a larder of snacks that you could go raid anytime you wanted. So they took really good care of us. But yes, if you were particular about what you wanted to eat, you would have had to plan really well in advance. I was sort of winging it, and there was a few occasions to grab something local, but that is one thing that the pace of this, it had to be really tight. And I do wish that I would have had more time to explore. I love traveling so much, and it kind of killed me to not be able to wander off somewhere and, check out
Yeah.
a local watering hole.
Is there anywhere that you would return to for a vacation or for a longer trip?
Oh, I would go to any of the places again.
Would you?
Literally, yeah, all 7. Even after, like Istanbul was unpleasant for me, but it wasn't the city's fault. So yeah, I would absolutely go back to any of them. I mean, Antarctica
So,
would be.
yeah.
So I don't know. I had to view that in my head as like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Absolutely. And so did you get to see the penguin colonies anywhere, or was it very much you pull up, like what's it? So you land on the ice and you're just in this place, and is it point to point, or you do a big loop back to the plane?
That one we did 4 loops, and it was that one I can't even imagine. There is really ironclad environmental protocols and like Antarctic law that is, it's a very unique place, and that people aren't allowed to claim permanent. I mean, you can be a resident there, but you're not actually like legally, a citizen of Antarctica. And so there's an incredible international cooperation involved in a place like Antarctica. And um, the course had to be designed to minimize environmental impact, and they were not messing around about environmental impact. There was one guy who accidentally dropped like the tiniest shred of the corner of a clear like cellophane wrapper and chased it for like a mile off extra in order to make sure that he got it back. And because they don't mess around, and nor should they. So the courses I think were designed for our safety, but also to minimize disruption to the local communities, and in the case of Antarctica, the environment.
At what point did you realize that there was a book in this, and how soon did you start writing it?
I sort of had bullet notes through it, but I always wanted to write about it for myself at least and record my own experiences. I'm fortunate that my sister-in-law who was there, she had a friend back home who, no matter how tired Sarah was after each event, while Sarah, my sister-in-law, would be, showering or doing her quick repacking, her friend would make her at all hours of the night call and just voice, verbally vomit whatever recollections of the logistics and details and timing and nuances of everything, and her friend would record it for us. And so Sarah's journals were a huge source for me. And without those, I don't know that it would have been necessarily a book about the event. It might have been about running and, a more conceptual response. But then the biggest thing was realizing that so many people, and I realized this on the plane, had these incredible stories that I even remember thinking at one point, somebody should write a book about this and about all these people. And then I was like, well, I'm a full-time writer. Maybe I can do it. So yeah, and it actually was fairly quick because I ended up meeting Andrew, the publisher with whom I worked, at a dinner in Miami the day after the final race. Mentioned that I felt like there was a book here, and he was like, "Yeah, so make a book." So yeah, that's how that process went.
So what's the journey of the book for anyone who's interested? To take us through the
Thank you for asking. Organized loosely around the 7 continents. So it is a recap of the race, but it's not meant to be, and then we did this, and then we did this. Weaves through, the idea is 7 different lessons, and these are not lessons that, I'm being the know-all of this. It's lessons just sort of about overcoming big obstacles and setting big goals. I interviewed 25 or 30 of the participants at least. They were so generous with their time. And so weaving in their experiences and their perspectives and how they overcome, setting big goals and removing obstacles and getting to these finish lines, literal and figurative, despite whatever you're facing. And one of the best compliments that I've received from someone who read the book is someone who said, I have never been a runner. I don't want to be a runner anymore after reading this. In fact, possibly even less, which is understandable. But they were like, you really kind of forced me to rethink the excuses that I make and revisit those and what it means to set big goals and not wait. So that's don't wait for your big goals is a huge ongoing theme that I have really personal reasons for emphasizing.
And what about skills or mindsets for just getting through the real adversity. Any tips that you can share that people might have shared with you or from your own experience?
Yeah, I really nerded out on the literal science behind tips and skills and to get through it. And I'm sort of a nerd by nature. And so I do weave some of these in through the book, but strategies of, for example, one of the hardest ones for me, because I'm sort of an introvert by nature, solo employed. I work alone. I run alone. I have a family, but like a lot of my big pursuits are solo. But literal research on leaning on other people, on asking for help. I discovered research on the reduced sense of physical pain when shared with others, like when other people, that other people are going through the same thing, even if you perceive that they are, and they don't have to be really close, like they can be just sort of, around you. It's fascinating to see what being involved with other people, even tangentially, can do to enhance, and using other people's skill sets and strengths to fill in the gaps that you might have. And also, of course, that requires being aware of those gaps that you have, as well as being vulnerable enough to speak with others and get them to be vulnerable with you about like, hey, here's where I'm struggling. Maybe do you have something that, we can sort of coalesce these strengths and weaknesses and be better together, even if we are still, these marathons were still ultimately individual pursuits, and yet there are absolutely ways in which we relied on each other.
That's so interesting, that idea that a shared purpose and being in it together might in fact be one of the most important ingredients for resilience and adaptability as you embark on things, something that every team should really know about, because
100%.
leaders are quite good at setting KPIs, but how often do they actually bring people together around that shared purpose and vision? Like we're actually all in this together rather than competing individually.
I was always someone who hated group projects and I think of working together as like literally physically someone is doing part of the race. But in a marathon, it's not like I can say, hey, Sarah, can you run these next 3 miles for me? It doesn't work. I still have to do the work. I still have to do all of it by myself. But it was interesting that it took to this point in my life to realize like, okay, it doesn't literally mean I'm not going to do this. It means I'm still going to do this. And how can I make my pursuit of this more productive, less painful, more enjoyable, more memorable, easier by pulling in things from other people? And in turn, how can I give that back to them?
Were there any situations where people leaned on you and actually needed you to help them overcome, whether it's mental, physical, emotional?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I heard from people, and I was not seeking this out when doing these interviews, but I definitely rely on humor as a default, particularly when I'm uncomfortable. And that is why I was just zinging one-liners during this event. But also, again, I don't think I have much, if any, natural athletic talent. In fact, I have a connective tissue disorder, a genetic connective tissue disorder that should make me not be able to do this. The only reason I can do it is I'm incredibly stubborn. When you asked about, was there a point I was going to give up? It's like, no, it was just, I got to figure this out. Like I have an ability, the way my sister-in-law describes it, it's like I can get into the pain cave is what, ultra athletes call it, and just find a foothold, dig in and just hang on forever. I can just keep going. So I was definitely not the fastest one out there, but I like to think that I could encourage people, and did whenever possible, to say like, nope, this type of event is cyclical. Right now, you're in a low point. You're going to get it back. Giving up is absolutely not an option. You just have to keep going. And if I could make them laugh there's also plenty of studies about laughter reducing the physical experience of pain as well. So that was my job. And also hopefully knowing when to shut up out there when people weren't ready for it. But it was heartening to see people sort of increasingly like, okay, Ellen, what do you got for me towards the end?
Nice. Yeah, I think you're exactly onto it. The connection and the humor and joy, recognizing that this is just a moment in time and you can still have fun despite the intensity. That's hugely beneficial. What's next? Have you any inkling of more adventures?
Yeah, well, the more immediate thing is in a few weeks, I will actually be Sarah's crew or part of her crew for a 100-mile, it's a really highly technical trail run in northern Minnesota on Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes. And we did the 50-mile version of this last fall. And I reminded myself that between my connective tissue issues and the fact that I just have no depth perception and I'm very clumsy in general, I came away from the 50 miler thinking, I'm never going to do this again. And she came away from it thinking, I want to do twice that much. So she's going to do that and I'm going to crew her for that. And she, in turn, this past February, she came along and crewed me for a 100 miler that I did in February. We were signed up to do one together in February, a flat, fast 100 miler. And it's actually the one where one of our fellow participants, Ashley Paulson, this past year smashed the women's 100-mile world record at this particular race. And Sarah and I were thrilled to find out that the course limit, the time limit, would allow us to go 25% as fast as Ashley did. It would let us go so slowly that Ashley was 4 times faster than us, which we both looked at it and were like, well, that sounds about right. That tracks.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
If anyone's out there feeling super inspired and they haven't done much running, okay, this is me. My dad was an ultramarathon runner and I've always fantasized about doing longer runs. He did the Comrades Marathon in South Africa many times. And where would you start? Do you start off sensibly with a 5 kilometer or 5 mile run and gradually build it up? I mean, how many years do you think someone needs to train before they start doing these types of things?
I can picture my family watching this laughing while they see my face and reaction because my instinct is to say 100%. It doesn't even need to be a 5K. I like being signed up for something. I did go straight to a marathon. I did the same thing with triathlon. I went straight to an Ironman. I was like, I don't even want to know what the Ironman 70.3 feels like because I'll spend the whole time thinking, I don't know if I could do twice this much. So it's like, just rip off the Band-Aid and go. So I am maybe not the best source of gradual. However, I will say that what I've learned over the years is everybody's training needs are different. For me, I tend to get injured or burn out when I run too much on back-to-back days. And I discovered this program. I have no skin in this game, but there's a program that is run less, run faster. And it's 3 days a week of running. That works great for me. I like cross training. I like lifting weights. I like doing yoga. And so it's nice to have extras, but you don't need to go out and start just making yourself suffer and doing these long runs every single day. I think it's important. Rest is just as important as the training. So yeah, but it depends on your mindset. I think having a specific goal, like maybe it's a 5K or it could be a run walk or something, I think helps you stop putting off finish lines. And it's ideal, I think, if it's something concrete, like a community race that's on the calendar. And maybe it's a charity race and you've committed and you're going to make those donations. You have to show up. Then it's not a question. I think so many people talk themselves out of doing something because they treat it as an option rather than something, this is happening. My challenge is not whether or not it's happening. It's how to get through it, how to get there, how to get through it.
What's always put me off is the idea of having to go and run for 3 hours every morning. Whereas, I could easily run a 15K, but doing it every morning, I would rather, the 3 days a week sounds fantastic. That's it. Because I like the yoga, I like the gym, all of the other stuff, surfing. Okay.
You would like that program.
Yeah, that
it's
makes a lot of sense.
It's one long run, one tempo run, and 1 day of speed work, and you can sort of shuffle them around the way you want. And I dropped, that was how I ultimately started regularly qualifying for Boston, was when I stopped doing extra days of running per week. So
less is more.
Considering.
I like it. If you could give yourself any advice, the you who landed in Cape Town before this all kicked off, would you give yourself any specific words of encouragement or advice?
Okay, well, the snarky response is practice sleeping on planes because that did not go super well. And check your luggage because certain Australian spiders like hiding in luggage. Those are the obvious ones. And do a better job of hanging onto your wallet because my wallet got stolen in Turkey.
Did it?
It's still over there. So yes. Okay. But those are the more Ellen specific maladies. But I think honestly, one of the biggest things is something that I always struggle with, which was just to be more present and just to convince myself that I absolutely am capable of this. And again, I'm good at saying this is going to happen, get through it. But in addition to that, I think I need to give myself more space to be just let the sort of awe wash over me and look around more and not just think, okay, I'm getting through this step, but be like, wow, look at where I am. And I did that some, but I think there's always an opportunity in an extreme event like that, but also in daily life too. It's like, this isn't a dress rehearsal, right? So I think there's always an opportunity to pause and look around a little bit more.
In fact, that's where so much of the magic happens. I was on a work trip last week. I drive around in my camper van and go and speak at events. And I decided I was just going to sit and actually try and meditate, but with my eyes open.
Mm.
After a certain point, you realize I'm not thinking anymore and you're just there. It is just, that's always available to us no matter what you're doing. And in fact, that was one of my favorite days of the year so far. Just
I love it.
Spending a little bit of time staring at the ocean with some trees and just really soaking it all in, because you can find awe pretty much anywhere. Even in a park. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I love that.
It is anywhere. Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to do something this unhinged and potentially
but it is pretty cool
in order to have that awe.
But it is pretty cool. So where should people go to pick up a copy? Where would you like them to follow you?
So the book is called 7 Marathons, 7 Continents, 1 Week. And the cover is an image of me all bundled up in Antarctica running through the finish line. And it can be, wherever books are sold. And then if your favorite bookstore doesn't have it, please ask them to carry it. And anyone can learn more at 7marathonsbook.com. And the word 7 is spelled out. That's where you can find out about me and about the book. And you can get links to buy it through there and learn a little bit more about the race.
And go to your local library and ask them to stock a copy. That's something I found was great with my last book.
I am a huge fan of libraries. Big library girl over here, so absolutely.
Yeah. Likewise. Excellent. Thanks so much, Ellen. It has been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, do check out those links. Any final words you'd like to share with those who stuck with us all the way to the end?
I appreciate everyone sticking around. I sort of dropped a little bit of a teaser there. These my personal reasons for not waiting, and I think that'd be my final takeaway. Was just real quick, the connective tissue disorder that I have is really misunderstood and not well known or researched, but it's called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, and basically the connective tissue, the tendons and ligaments and everything that is supposed to hold your body together, in my case, doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So, all those bendy party tricks that I used to think were funny are apparently not that funny, and I'm not allowed to do them anymore. So research has shown that it took men from the first time that they pursue answers on this to when they actually get a diagnosis with the condition. It took 4 years, and for women, it's 16. So that's not acceptable, and we got to get better. So that's why I speak about that. And it's degenerative. So that's why I feel like, if you can do the thing now, do the thing now. I say that in the book. It's not very eloquent. And I also, during the editing process of this book, lost my father to Alzheimer's, and he started showing the symptoms of that when he was not that much older than I am right now. So you also don't need those looming scare tactics to do it. But that's what I keep saying is like, if not now, when? So do the thing.
Love it. Ellen, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.